kissed and hugged by their mothers, grew up to be stress-free, well-adjusted adults, which all makes sense. How did scientists find this out? By studying rats. Now, the image of mother rat cuddling baby rat is not one that I wanted to have, but the research tells us that mother rats that lick baby rats' fur grew up to be less fearful and better balanced adults. That's just what we need in the world, isn't it? More well-balanced rats running around in the streets.
Okay, that's Declan Curry of the BBC with licking and cuddling rats in London. Thank you for joining us.
All right, thanks Declan Curry here this morning, and Tamil and I will take a break here and join the entire network for a special report in just a moment. Stay tuned here.
This is an ABC News special report.
And good morning from ABC News headquarters here in New York, where we have confirmed at the hour that the transfer of sovereignty has taken place in Iraq. As you may have known, we at least publicly believe that handover of power was to take place by this Wednesday, June 30th, but we're learning this morning that it in fact has taken place and has taken place within the last hour or so. So Iraq's interim government has taken control of the country today, Monday morning, and of course our Peter Jennings is there to report on the handover of Iraq. We plan to talk with him later this morning. We do know that Foreign Minister Hoshyar Zebari has had discussions this morning with Britain's Prime Minister Tony Blair and had told him that handover would take place. Tony Blair not confirming it, though we have confirmed it at this point. Again, the transfer of sovereignty taking place in Iraq this morning, presumably earlier than the June 30th deadline for security reasons, though certainly as the state unfolds, we'll learn more about why it has unfolded the way it has. Peter Jennings again in Iraq. We'll be talking with him later on this morning here on ABC. That's the latest from ABC News. We now rejoin our regularly scheduled programming.
For continuing coverage of this story, stay with ABC News, abcnews.com, and ABC News Radio. This has been a special report from ABC News.
And so for those of you who are watching World News Now, we continue with this broadcast for all of our ABC stations carrying WNN. And this is a little bit surprising because they had given the June 30th deadline as the date that they would transfer sovereignty, but with the tactics that we've seen in recent days with hostages and certainly the beheading of the American in recent days and then the U.S. Marine now being held hostage, that perhaps they had decided for security reasons it would be better to do this when the public wasn't expecting it.
And they certainly were not expecting it today, and in fact news began to trickle out over this morning that something was coming, and word started that different officials were saying that they thought that power would be handed over. And in fact, the foreign minister of Iraq, Hoshyar Zebari, told reporters who were actually at a NATO summit in Istanbul that he expected that the formal handover of the government could be moved forward perhaps as early as today. And he made an interesting comment. He said, you know, in talking about the country's future, after June 30th, it will be up to us to run our country and to manage our security. It will be an asset test of our country and our future. And I think that's an interesting choice of words, an asset test, certainly as people look at what's going on over there, from their energy and other problems to what's going on with security. It will be an asset test.
And we know that this morning is an incredibly difficult one for a family in Utah, the family of Corporal Wasif Ali Hassoun. We have learned is his name. Of course, the video being aired on Al Jazeera yesterday. This is the latest U.S. soldier to be taken captive. It is believed that he was, the videotape was aired of him by a militant group threatening to behead him if the U.S. military did not release all prisoners in Iraq. Initially, the U.S. military did not release his name, though his identity was revealed in the video, and now his family in Utah has confirmed that this is in fact their relative, that it is Corporal Wasif Ali Hassoun. They issued a statement saying, "In the name of Allah, the merciful, the compassionate, we accept destiny with its good and its bad. We pray, we plead for his safe release, and we ask all people of the world to join us in our prayers. May God bless us all." He is, of course, one of several hostages right now.
And what's interesting about that particular prayer, almost, if you will, as you pointed out, is that the opening of it is very reminiscent of many Islamic prayers, and so one wonders if the family themselves and their son also happens to be a fellow Muslim. And little bits of information are coming out about him, that the family immigrated from Lebanon, that he was so excited to join the army, and that he was excited and proud to be an American.
And that perhaps this wasn't the first time that he had served in Iraq, that this was his second second tour of duty over in Iraq. So certainly our thoughts are with his family. And of course, we'll continue to follow the breaking story out of Iraq at this hour, that the sovereignty has been handed over to Iraq 2 days earlier than expected. We're going to take another break now to rejoin the entire network with a special report. And Peter Jennings.
This is an ABC News special report.
And good morning from ABC News headquarters here in New York. I'm David Muir, where we continue to follow a developing situation in Iraq where the transfer of sovereignty has taken place 2 days earlier than we had at least publicly expected. We knew that handover of power would take place before or on June 30th. We're joined now by Peter Jennings, who of course is in Iraq to report on the handover of power. And Peter, good morning to you.
Good morning, David. It was a very crowded office in which this very simple ceremony took place. It consisted of a single-page letter handed by as he called himself, the ex-administrator Paul Bremer, to the Iraqi Prime Minister Alawi, saying that Iraq was now a sovereign nation and he, Paul Bremer, was the ex-administrator. So the transfer of sovereignty comes in the form of a simple single letter, and 2 days before the originally scheduled date, for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think that Prime Minister Alawi was pretty clear to Americans to get this done as soon as possible. He said that in the last several days, a number of the Iraqi ministries were now ready to be autonomous themselves and run by themselves, but also a clear acknowledgement here that this is something of a strategic tactic in order to throw off the opposition in the country, which may have wanted to use the 30th itself or today or tomorrow to try to disrupt the actual handover ceremonies. It was very simple. The Iraqi president was there, the Iraqi prime minister, the British ambassador, Mr. Bremer was there, the chief judge of the principal court was there as a witness. There were a handful of journalists, myself included, and it seemed almost anticlimactic in one respect. Ambassador Bremer, we asked, did he think it was worth it? He thought that the liberation was a glorious thing. Iraq was a much better place than it was when the United States arrived. And Prime Minister Alawi said that it was now time for free and democratic Iraq to continue to be a source of freedom and security for the whole region. The coalition here had not come and shed its blood in vain. There was now no way to turn back. He thanked the coalition and the people who live in the coalition countries, most notably the United States, their contribution to Iraqi freedom. But it is now a sovereign country in political terms, of course not purely in military terms.
In fact, Peter, you describe it as a simple ceremony, almost anticlimactic. Certainly, it doesn't sound like there was any mention of Saddam Hussein, but do we have any idea what happens now as far as custody of Saddam Hussein?
There's discussion here and some speculation about whether or not Saddam Hussein is going to be transferred into the legal custody of the Iraqis today. I've got quite a lot of static, David, so I'll try again. There's some discussion here about whether Saddam Hussein will be transferred legally into Iraqi custody as early as today, perhaps in the next several days. But there is no indication at the moment that his physical custody will be handled by anyone but the United States. At the moment, this is true for the other senior Iraqi officials who are being held by the U.S. at this moment. Now, that could change. This was a bit of a surprise. Yes, it was anticlimactic, but I think as we look back, those of us who were jammed into this office down here inside the green zone this morning will realize in retrospect that it was an historic moment, even though it was slightly chaotic and, as you said, perhaps a little anticlimactic.
My question, when will Paul Bremer leave now? We had known that he would definitely be gone by June 30th, but does this mean he heads out of Iraq today?
Mr. Bremer is out of here, actually, and I was surprised to see him leave in the next couple of hours. He's definitely going to be out of here today. They didn't want to put a specific time on that. The same reason they didn't want to announce this over, I think, so as to cause any overt physical opposition to either his departure. But my suspicion is that between sometime in the next 48 hours, Mr. Bremer is going to be back in the United States. His job finished here. One of the offices we were in this morning, had a remaining letter on his desk handing over, at least saying to the Iraqis that several $100 million would be available for reconstruction programs. He has conducted his last public act as the U.S. administrator in Iraq.
And we continue to watch as these insurgents use the common tactic as of late, the U.S. soldier that has now been confirmed being held hostage among the Turkish soldiers, the Pakistani soldier also being held hostage. Any talk about that this morning?
Well, not in specific terms, but certainly there's some talk this morning about the fact that Prime Minister Lawi has his own set of security credentials from his time both in the Iraqi government and in terms of opposition. And so he this morning gave off the vibes of a man who was quite determined to get his hands on the legal levers of the security apparatus. I don't think it's going to change the situation very much, but he has a reputation of being one very tough character, and gave us the impression in his brief remarks this morning that he would move as vigorously could on every front, but he was not so unwise as to not thank the continuing participation of coalition forces, most notably the U.S.
We know a gentleman who will have his hands full is the new U.S. ambassador to Iraq, John Negroponte. Any word when he's expected to arrive?
Well, we don't know when he's expected to arrive, and I was talking to the new American press secretary here just a few minutes ago, and he points out that Mr. Negroponte's arrival from the U.S. will be kept a secret for security reasons. This is a dangerous and tense place, as I think everybody knows, and so not that Mr. Negroponte will necessarily sneak into the country, but I suspect he will slip into the country.
And a lot has been made of how this will affect U.S. troops, if in any way. Will we see any change over who has control over the situation in the coming days?
I don't think we know that, Dave, but I was a little surprised this morning to arrive. I came in this morning from Jordan and arrived at the airport and came immediately downtown to this ceremony. No U.S. forces to speak of anywhere at the Baghdad airport. Very few of them visible on this sometimes quite dangerous strip of road between the airport and downtown. And not until I got inside the green zone were you particularly aware of the American presence. But it's not a question I can answer for the rest of the country. Sometimes American troops are very open and very overt in what they're doing, and sometimes they're out of the way. The Iraqis and the U.S. have both said that in the future the U.S. will have a far lower profile than it has had in the past, but will raise its profile when the Iraqi government and the U.S. agree that it is necessary.
All right, many thanks to Peter Jennings. Our anchor Peter Jennings is in Baghdad, of course, covering the transfer of power for us. We will have more from his reporting later this morning on Good Morning America, but of course Peter pointing out that it was a very simple ceremony inside the green zone. Peter, one of a handful of journalists who witnessed that transfer of power, sovereignty turned over to Iraq. I'm David Muir, ABC News headquarters in New York.
For continuing coverage of this story, stay with ABC News, abcnews.com, and ABC News Radio. This has been a special report from ABC News.
It is Monday morning. Another American is apparently a hostage in Iraq, this time a U.S. Marine.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Now.
His family is praying and pleading for his safe return. Hello from New York, everyone. I'm David Muir.
Good morning. I'm Tamala Edwards. Also ahead this half hour, President Bush and other NATO leaders focus on Iraq at their summit in Turkey. And presidential campaigning in the age of the internet, both good and bad. But we begin this morning in Iraq.
Tamala, we're going to get straight back to that breaking news this morning, the handover of sovereignty in Iraq. We're joined from Baghdad from ABC's Jim Sciutto. And Jim, what can you tell us about this ceremony that Peter Jennings briefed us on just moments ago?
Well, clearly, as he said, a very simple ceremony. After all this, 14 months after the start of the war, about 13 months after the U.S. forces effectively took over the country, just a simple one-page letter saying that Iraqis now have sovereignty over Iraq, as you say, 2 days before we thought they were, in part because the Iraqis were eager to take over control. Iraqi Prime Minister Iyad Allawi eager to get the work started, but also in part to keep the militants here on edge, a surprise, because there was a lot of build-up to these couple of days that there would be a lot of violence centered around this ceremony. Certainly Iraqi officials, U.S. officials a target, the ceremony itself a target. So a surprise now that it was held 2 days before anybody thought it was going to be held.
And late details this morning, any late information on the situation with the hostages? Of course, the family in Utah waiting for word on their loved one who was taken hostage over the weekend. Actually, earlier than the weekend, though, confirmed this weekend.
Here's what we know. Marine Corporal Wasaf Ali Hassoun, a member of the Marine Expeditionary Force, which is doing its work out by Ramadi around Fallujah, one of the worst centers of resistance to the occupation.